Former Channel 4 foreign correspondent Ian Williams wrote a Sunday Times article last week in which he laid out the shocking extent of the surveillance state that underpins President Xi Jinping's regime. According to an analysis by a security firm, China has 540 million security cameras, which is more than any other country in the world, and more than one for every 3 people. Perhaps even more concerning, the cameras are becoming more smart and people can be recognised via facial recognition software and even by the way they walk. So, Ian Williams joins me now. Thanks for joining me, Ian. So, I want to start because I read your article in the Sunday Times. I thought it was fascinating and very, very frightening. And you actually draw a lot of parallels between what's happening in China and Orwell's novel 1984. And although that is a common trope, it really is, you have sound grounds for doing so, don't you?
Well, you look at 1984 and Big Brother and the sort of thing that we're seeing in China, Orwell could only have dreamed about. Big Brother, the telescreen, which figures quite prominently in that book, is a two-way system, so you can be watched. But one of the remarks that is made by the protagonist in that book is, well, at least they don't know what we're thinking. But increasingly in China, they do. And you've got this system of multiple aspects, whether it's the cameras, the tracking through your devices, eavesdropping on your social media. They know there's very few places to hide these days in China. It's quite chilling, and this is what underpins Xi Jinping's rule. And
of course, when it came to the Stasi in East Germany, in East Berlin, it was very different, wasn't it? Because you had, as you say in your article, an army of informants. I think it was something like 2% of the male population between 16 and 60, something like that. But they did fall apart. They didn't have the digital technology that we have now. So this is really a digital war that's being fought, isn't it?
It is, and it's remarkable because the Stasi was regarded as state-of-the-art at the time. And if you go now to, say, the Stasi Museum in Berlin, and you see the cameras hidden in watering cans or in lapel badges.
Yeah, quite primitive, right?
It's incredible, but that was regarded as state-of-the-art. But you're right, this is a digital totalitarian state. This depends on the collection of vast amounts of data, looking for patterns in that data. And, of course, this has been perfected during the COVID pandemic, because this has given the state license to wheel out numerous of these technologies. Previously, we saw them mainly in Xinjiang, in the province in the far west of China, where there's been this horrific crackdown against the native Uyghurs, which has been likened to genocide.
Yes.
But under the guise of a health emergency, they have intensified and wheeled out these systems right across China.
So it is your view that the Chinese government has actually exploited the pandemic in order to reach its goal of a kind of totalitarian dystopia?
I think they have, and it's been very easy for them to sell it as such, because, of course, when you've got a crisis, I mean, we saw it here to some extent.
Yes.
People will accept things when you've got a health crisis, which normally you might question. And, of course, crucial to the way they're policing the COVID crisis have been these apps which everybody has to carry on their phones.
Yes.
It's called the Traffic Light app. It crunches enormous amounts of data about your health, your movements, your interactions, and it gives you a light, whether it's red, yellow or green. And if it's red, that's quarantine. If it's green, you're allowed to move around. And these are everywhere, in taxis and in restaurant entrances.
And people won't know too much about this for a variety of reasons, one of which, of course, is that China is so guarded about how much the outside world gets to know about it. You've written a book, though. So the book you wrote about this was named after a police song, I believe.
That's right. Every Breath You Take was inspired by Sting.
Yes.
And, in fact, it's an interesting song because every breath you take, every move you make.
Yes.
And I thought it was the best possible way of describing what was being built in China. And, of course, Sting himself, shortly after the song came out, gave an interview in which he said it's a nasty little song, it's about surveillance, it's about control.
I thought it was about a stalker or something.
Well, that was one of the people speculated about whether it was a stalker, whether it was anything to do with his first marriage.
Yes.
But I think he was worried because this song suddenly became a big hit at weddings. Which is, when you think about it now,
it's
is
quite
mind-boggling.
creepy. Yeah. So one of the things that you mentioned in your article is about that China has developed emotional recognition software. So they're able to hone in with their digital technology and surveillance cameras and kind of detect what people are feeling. Is that right? Because that's really veering into the realms of thought crime.
It is, and in fact, it's, think Minority Report,
yes,
think Tom Cruise, and trying to anticipate crime or anticipate dissent by the way people look.
Yes.
It was rolled out in some schools in China where kids were monitored for different expressions.
Yes. And that's very scary. I mean, that could easily be exploited, of course. But the very fact that it exists suggests that, there's a possibility of criminalising someone for something that they perceive that they have thought.
Yes, and one of the companies that was developing this software was boasting that it could detect about 50 different expressions.
Yes.
Even before the brain realised that it was making them.
So chilling.
It's really quite scary. And the company which was developing this was using a scene out of Mission Impossible: Rogue Nation.
Yes.
When Simon Pegg was trying to get into a power station. You may recall it, and he was being warned that all the systems can recognise the way you walk, the way you look,
yes.
Your emotions, and you'll never get in.
Yes.
And this Chinese company, I'm sure they asked permission, were using this extract from the movie in order to try and promote their software.
So, to what extent is this social credit system that we hear about in China a reality?
It's becoming a reality. There were several or numerous pilot schemes across China which effectively looked at everything you did online and in social media, and then gave you a rating based upon that. Now, they likened it to a credit score.
But it's a loyalty score, loyalty to the regime, effectively.
It is, because this is the way the regime sees it, and they want to turn this into a national system.
Yes.
Where you can be rated by your loyalty to the party, by your loyalty to the country.
Yes.
And then, of course, you can have things withdrawn, your travel rights, your ability to meet people, your ability to get loans.
So if people don't understand at home, just to be clear, when you have this social credit system, it means it will affect how much you're able to spend, what you're able to buy, where you're able to go, and all of that is dependent on your ideological fealty to the regime. That's
right. So there are multiple ways of punishing you or constraining your behaviour in order to try and persuade you
yes.
To conform and not to deviate. And the regime clearly sees this as something that it can integrate. Don't forget, with all this other data we're seeing collected from the cameras,
yes.
tracking devices, and they're investing a lot of money in artificial intelligence as a way of crunching this data and bringing it all together.
But you also mentioned that they have an awful lot of people who are dedicated to monitoring the internet, deleting websites and forums, even entering chat rooms to try and steer conversations in certain ways. How many was it you said were
2 million.
2 million?
2 million is one estimate.
Agents of the state.
Yep, number of people who are dubbed as internet police. It's a very, the algorithms are there, but it's also quite labour intensive. And a lot of these people work for the internet companies. And their job is not only to censor by looking for blocking sites, blocking keywords,
yes.
and the keyword index will change according to what's going on at any one time. But they will also join conversations.
Yes.
It's become more subtle, more clever, if you like, and they join conversations in order to steer those conversations away from contentious areas.
That's incredible. And to what extent have they had companies such as Apple, Western companies, supporting the regime in this?
I think that's one of the most scandalous things in this, is that Western companies, in my opinion, have been complicit in the development of the surveillance state. I've been particularly critical of Apple because Apple tends to say, here we are, we believe in privacy. Privacy is a human right. But that sentiment tends to stop at the Chinese border.
Yes.
And they've been criticised of colluding with the Communist Party by removing apps from the local app store, by storing data locally.
But, of course, they would say they have to abide by the law.
Yeah, that is always the way that they retort, that they have to abide by the law in any country in which they're operating in.
Yes.
And, of course, recently they've been, the new China update of the iOS system for iPhone has limited AirDrop.
Yes.
And AirDrop is a device for its sort of near-range communication. And protesters have been using this to exchange information and files because it's safer, because you keep off the cell network and the Wi-Fi network. And Apple have argued, well, this is going to be rolled out universally because we think there are just too many files being exchanged. But they face a lot of criticism for this. But yes, Apple would retort and has replied that we're only conforming to the laws of the countries we operate in.
Well, Ian Williams, I could talk to you about this all night. It's such a fascinating topic. I should point out that your new book is called The Fire of the Dragon. This is out right now, yes? And this is you touch on these issues in this as well, yes?
Yeah, and that builds upon the first book, and it really poses a question. How do you describe the relationship with China? I mean, you see the government at the moment tying itself in knots about how to do that.
Yes.
Systemic rivalry, systemic competition. And what does that mean? I mean, I think it is, by all intents and purposes, already a Cold War, and certainly that's the way China looks at it.
Ian Williams, thanks very much for joining me today.